like cushion cut diamond.
Anyway, okay, we're live.
Okay.
Anyway, hi, Gabby. Thank you so much for coming onto Venture with Grace today.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Okay, so to give the audience a little bit of your background, why don't we start with your like entrepreneur journey at Oli? So like I know that you kind of like you talk about like previously you work in Boston at a streetwear startup. So like anyway, like please start from wherever you feel like comfortable with. I just thought your journey was so interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, so it was definitely not planned. I didn't go, my first job out of college, as you mentioned, was a streetwear company in Boston called Karmaloop. It was, in Boston, I wanted to be in retail and fashion because I thought that was really cool at the time. And there wasn't a whole lot of options in Boston. And I sort of landed in this job having no idea what streetwear was. And very quickly sort of joined a team that was launching a sample sales site like a Gilt Group, but for the streetwear industry. And from the ground up, we launched and, kept building it. And it was the best and worst first startup experience ever because it was actually like very successful and we got to 30 million run rate in our first year. And I was like, startups are great. And all of a sudden I was a startup junkie. And so from there, went to another startup in New York, a joint venture with American Express and Bon Privé when they launched in the US. And then at that point, after a few years there, was sort of when I realized like, okay, startups are my place. Like I love the fast pace. I love the building. I love feeling like I have a really big breadth of view of what's happening in the company versus sort of a specific place. And now I want to do my own. And so I then went to business school feeling like there's lots of things that I maybe have been doing intuitively, but want to understand the ins and outs of and really get, how do I build a financial model and how do I actually look at accounting and sort of things that I felt like I needed, and certainly not everyone does, but lots of people learn a lot of this on the job. But for me, like my confidence needed to have that as sort of the backbone to feeling like I could do it on my own. So from business school, joined Primary Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence, where Ollie was birthed, sort of both as out of a sort of academic diligence around subscription models and what made sense in the industry, and also a personal experience of health issues my dog was happening. And so the intellectual and the passion project grew together, sort of the birth of Ollie, where I was at as a co-founder and chief experience officer there for, I don't know, 7-8 years, had my first 2 kids while I was at Ollie. Signed my Series A term sheet for Ollie from the labor and delivery room of number 1, along with my team. My team wasn't actually my co-founders were not in the labor and delivery room with me, thankfully. But we had to get everything signed that day. So my signature was required regardless of where I was. And sort of that was the spark of the initial idea, again, both passion, intellect around what is now Cooper. So walked out of the hospital with baby number 1, feeling like a total deer in headlights. I was so focused on my career and the startup and the fact that I was physically having a baby, which if I know you're a mom too, like that, the concept and like the reality of that you're going to birth a child for the first time is very mind boggling. And so I think so much attention is placed on that, and also your sort of health and how you're doing throughout the pregnancy. And there's not nearly enough attention postpartum for you or the child in terms of you being prepared. And so felt very ill-equipped to enter motherhood. It sent me into kind of a spiral around anxiety, I think, which is even more common when you see women that are used to figuring things out and driven and feeling like, we can accomplish whatever we set our mind to. And yet now all of a sudden feeling like we don't have anywhere to turn to, don't have a mentor, don't have the tools, don't have something to read. And so looked for a support group, found one in New York, but it was a little bit of the blind leading the blind, for lack of a better expression. We were all first-time moms trying to figure it out. And, there was a great thing about misery loves company. And that was true, but it also, I think for a lot of us made us feel even more unsettled around, like, one person was reading 12 by 12 weeks and someone else was reading a book on co-sleeping, and is there a middle ground, and why should you choose one over another? And so we were all left in this guessing game, and I looked around and was like, this should not be the case. Like, there should be data and research. And that sort of set me behind the scenes on looking for what else is out there. And so long story short, after COVID hit, luck favors the brave or prepared in some ways. And we had a great opportunity with Ollie where we got a large strategic investor from a publicly traded company. It allowed me to sort of step out of the day-to-day role in Ollie and very quickly focus in on what does Cooper look like. At the time, it obviously wasn't Cooper. We had no name for it, but myself and my partner and our education team looked around and were like, the world just like went virtual overnight. Practitioners are willing to go virtual overnight. People need support more than they ever have. And again, that sort of combination of the academic pursuit and the personal passion pursuit sort of came together into what is now Cooper, which is an expert parenting support platform. So every parent can enter parenthood and go through their journey feeling supported the whole way through.
I think that's an amazing journey. Let's unpack it a little bit about, how you went from, I guess, like, what were the lessons that you've learned from, selling premier dog food to like creating a parenting group. And also, like, I believe you also worked on kids clothing before. I don't know if there's any experiences that you felt like were inspired you for pursuing this entire like parenting or like young children ecosystem. And also, hi Meredith, I want to say hi to the audience anyway.
Hi. So I think as I sort of said, like a lot of this was sort of unplanned, and it's easier to look back with sort of your crystal ball and say, like, of course, like this led to this, led to this. I think like one of the main lessons that I've learned in entrepreneurship is like, when you see something that you're passionate about, to be able to go after it, it's really to like pull out things from your background and learnings that you have and put them into use. And then where you don't have learnings, go find the answer. So, I think when I started, I worked with primary kids when I was in business school. It was my internship between my first and second year. At the time, it was sort of true startup. We were working out of a cafe, was then the Reebok Club. Now it's Equinox. This is before they even raised their pre-seed, working on their deck, sort of saw the whole way through from deck to preparing for launch. What does a go-to-market plan look like? How do you get to launch? How do you sort of build all the different channels at once? And at the time, obviously didn't have kids. And so it was like, yeah, it's fun, but like this category doesn't really speak to me yet. And so it was almost less the like specifics of working with kids as it was the specifics of working with like truly amazing operators. So Galen and Christina, who were the founders of, or are the founders of primary.com, were really, really, open book and amazing to work with. In that I got to see all of that. So then when it came time to doing it on my own, like, again, it wasn't the exact same thing, but I was able to see how the pieces sort of fit together. And instead of manufacturing clothing, we were manufacturing dog food. And instead of building a supply chain on cottons and t-shirts and, fabrics leading to X amount of yardage, leading to t-shirts, leading to leggings, etc. I was figuring out, how do I get supply chain on meat and vegetables? And there's sort of different factors come into play around shelf life. And then that business was a subscription model. And so how then that became sort of the model for a Cooper membership model. And it's really just like, again, how do you find the threads of its pattern recognition, and then taking like, okay, what worked well, what didn't work? How do I bring that in? And also every business is different, just like every kid is different. What works for one doesn't always work for another. And so we're trying to figure out and stay nimble. One specific example is, both at Primary Kids and at Ollie, our influencer strategy was fairly seamless. So we had gorgeous, Primary had the cutest clothes. You put a cute black unexpected onesie on an adorable, like chunky baby, take a picture, and like everyone goes wild, right? Similarly at Ollie, we invested a lot in our packaging and presentation. So what could be a kind of a gross experience of like 20 pounds of frozen meat arriving on your doorstep is in this like white box with red writing. And it looks so like, it looks like something that belongs in your fridge, because for the first time, dog food should be in your fridge. And that's sort of the category that Ollie created. And so people would put their dog on top of the box and take a picture and share it. And so the virality of both just general social media as well as the product itself sort of lent itself to influencer marketing. And we both were able to really leverage that and put money behind the ads, the organic, UGC in order to create ads. And I remember starting Cooper, I spent a lot of 4 a.m. train rides going out to our manufacturers, grinding meat in minus 30 degree temperatures. You have to be food safety, frozen environments, like freezing all day, windowless manufacturing facilities all through pregnancy. And I remember starting, I'm so glad that I'm not manufacturing a product, like that I don't have physical product. I don't have to worry about inventory. Like this is going to be such a breath of fresh air. And then you realize like, okay, yes, we don't have physical product, but there's a whole slew of other challenges and difficulties that you don't even foresee that comes from a service industry. And one of those is without having a physical product, we don't have something to photograph easily. And therefore, like, how do we create this sort of awareness and virality in a increasingly, social network driven world when we don't have physical product? So I like to say life's a seesaw. Like when one side seems up, the other side seems down, and continuously, how are you balancing that?
Totally. For the audience who are not familiar with Cooper, why don't we start with like what is a product offering? And so like one thing I thought were really impressive is like I guess like since it's a community driven product, I would love for you to unpack a little bit on like how you get started with like, let's say the first like 3 users to like now, you guys have like hundreds, or I don't know the exact number of the users, but like being in the group that I'm in, like I see 200 people. So like maybe there's like I'm just one of these people in one of these groups, but like I wonder how do you kind of like grow it into where it is today?
Yeah. So Cooper, we have community for sure, but I think what differentiates Cooper is that we're expert driven. So we're an expert parenting support platform. We help support parents all the way from expecting through adolescence. So again, unlike many other platforms out there, we like to say there's a lot of parenting cliffs. So you have a baby, all of a sudden you're in this cliff of now you have to take care of the baby and no one is actually helping you go through that. So we want to make the ride smooth and sort of smooth out any of these cliffs so that you feel supported your whole parenting journey. And the way we do that is our experts who are all have a master's or above in a child developmental field, as well as 15 plus years of working with children and families, will lead these groups. And so we match parents based on their child's developmental age, that they're sort of going through the journey at the same time with their cohort, and then match them with an expert. And so you meet with your group once a month virtually, where you are taken not only through a curriculum around what's happening with your child, but there's lots of times for troubleshooting the everyday ups and downs that you have as a parent and making you feel supported, taking the guessing game out. And then we also have twice a week open, we like to say, ask us anything office hours. So any of our members can log in, can meet with one of our expert parenting coaches and ask any question and talk through the specifics. And again, what's really unique is the personalization. So it's not a video that you're going to watch and be like, okay, but I tried that and it didn't work. Now what do I do? And you can actually talk through step by step, and you can sort of decision tree. And if it doesn't work, then what can you do? And it's so helpful to have that real live experience with that expert so that you can particularize it. So we get to know your child and your child's temperament, and also your temperament as a parent and how you want to approach things and where your triggers are and where your glimmers are and how to really support that. And so we started, in terms of our first few, it was a combination of lots of things. One, we started our social channel way before we launched. So again, our partners in this are Dr. Erin O'Connor and Marielle Benjamin. And so we worked with both of them on creating content for social media that was just expert tips and to support research-backed evidence that was sort of shock and awe in a lot of ways for parents. So around how much numeracy is in your house and spoken about, and how does that lead to different outcomes later in terms of your child's math abilities, and just really interesting topics that parents like to dive in. So we generated quite a big following before we launched. So when we actually launched the product, we had some awareness from that for people to be able to sign up and join more of those groups. And then like any, like a lot of other businesses, we used our friends, family, and network originally to get the word out. We sent big emails out. We worked with partner companies. And it sort of is a little bit of a snowball effect in terms of one person uses the platform, they all of a sudden feel this like immediate sense of relief of confidence that they didn't have before as a parent, and reduction in stress. And all of a sudden they have a community that they can lean on that is there for them, that they didn't have to go find and build. Like everyone says, it takes a village, it takes a community. And yet you sort of look around and you're like, where? How do I build a community? No one even told me that. And so, I think people come for the expertise because they have this burning question. I didn't even know that you have to feed every couple hours. I was sort of like, I don't know, don't they eat three? I expected my baby just to eat 3 meals a day, which sounds so silly in hindsight, but I don't know how I would have known otherwise. And so you sort of come for the expertise, and then you stay for the community. And now like anything and everything from someone asking about where to get their hair done, to what high chair is the best and that they're not going to trip on, but also isn't an eyesore, to someone's kid coming home from school, and telling them about a difficulty they had, like, and everything in between. You have both the experts as well as your community to lean on for that support. And so no longer you having to recreate the wheel and build everything all at once.
Totally. I wonder, so like when I guess like I have a couple questions there. One is like when you were, let's say before you started your company, like I guess like what were people doing before? What were like I guess like what do you consider were your competitors? And like also like how um I guess, like, because right now, like, I guess you guys started during the pandemic, and correct me if I'm wrong. So, like, I think that's very different than now. Like, people are offline again. I wonder how do you like facing maybe the challenges of like people would want to have like a gathering in person. However, some of the people are all over the world.
Yeah. So a few things. One, like this doesn't preclude your ability to have
Mhm.
in-person relationships and in-person
Yeah.
gatherings. And we actually have a
Mhm.
few of our groups that regularly happen to live in the same area and regularly will do in-person meetups. I think um like since the pandemic, the world has changed too in terms of in-person
Mhm.
meetings versus Zoom and virtual. And so there is something even without a pandemic that
Mhm.
creates this ease and lack of friction with the virtual nature
Mhm.
of this. We're not expecting everyone to sit at home and spend their whole life on their computer, and therefore, like,
Mhm.
that's certainly interaction. That's never been our goal. I think what's beautiful about us being virtual is that there's a fewfold. One, yes, you can join from anywhere. So if
Mhm.
you are in a small town, somewhere across the world that you might not have parents with kids the same age or don't know where to turn to, like
Mhm.
you can log in and turn to someone immediately. Two, this isn't something that you then have to plan and and spend sort of extra time figuring out and get a
Mhm.
sitter in order to join. So lots of parents will join their group and select times to meet their group sort of in the evenings when their kids are already in bed. And it's sort of like, I was just going to be in my house sort of sitting alone, and now I can log in and have all my questions answered right away.
Mhm.
Or it's something that they're doing sort of at the office in a lunch break time, where otherwise the ability to physically schedule, get someplace, get back would have been prohibited. So I think it's providing access in a way that you never
Mhm.
could before. Of course, it doesn't replace in-person community and in-person
Mhm.
gatherings, and you should be going to lunch and brunch and doing sort of all the fun things, and going to
Mhm.
the park with other parents. But it does replace having to use those parents for everything, particularly that expertise, because in person or not, your fellow parents are, as I said, sort of the blind leading the blind. They're all figuring it out together. And so this is the way that you can get the expertise and get the like other people to ask to, and that doesn't replace your in-person community or interactions, you know, the 23 out of the
Mhm.
24 hours of your day.
Totally. When you were thinking about like creating the community, who are your first I guess like ideal customers? Is this designed for like people living in primary cities in the US, or like how like when you were designing this journey or this experience, who were your target audience and how do you kind of like attract them at scale?
Yeah. So I think the world has totally changed since our parents parented us.
Mhm.
Parenting has, as our head of community and curriculum says, like, parenting's become a verb in a way that it never was before. And so much of our kids' success and failure, we now see, rightly or wrongly, as a reflection of our job as a parent, right? It used to sort of be
Mhm.
like, kids will raise themselves, they come out fully baked, like, not a whole lot we can do in between,
Mhm.
like, keep them safe, and that's about it. And so I think as parents continuously feel that, and as social media particularly continues to creep into our everyday of like the picture perfect family, parent,
Mhm.
child, extracurriculars, pressures go on, like, it doesn't matter where you live, you're still feeling that. And so we really designed our platform, again, that by the nature of being virtual, that we could meet parents anywhere. And so our, like, you know maybe wrongly, but our initial sort of user base was not supposed to be where a lot of startups are very coastal or major metropolitan, because they need that density. If they are doing live, or they need that density for marketing, or they're only able to serve that, because we're virtual, we could serve all parents really quickly. So we're not the type of parent, we're not right for the parent that thinks that parenting is intuitive, or that they should just know how to do it. We're the type of parent that wants to learn the data, that wants to understand the why behind the behavior that they're seeing, and be informed about the decisions that we make. I also would say we're not for a parent that wants to necessarily, although they can, follow one philosophy, right? There's lots
Mhm.
of philosophies that work in parenting. Just if you take like Montessori versus Reggio from a school age,
Mhm.
they both have a lot of data that supports the efficacy of those sort of schooling, right? And we're
Mhm.
here to sort of bring parents the knowledge around, well, why would I decide one versus the other, which ultimately comes down to both a personal decision for you, as well as what is a better environment for your particular kid. But we're
Mhm.
here to empower you with education and knowledge. And so when we set out to build it, and the scale of it, like, again, that's where we're really using a combination of our groups telling other groups to build that
Mhm.
virality, as well as like we're investing mostly in paid search and partnerships as our growth strategy.
Mhm.
So really high intent on the search, someone looking for parenting classes, or someone looking for how to potty train, or my kid's
Mhm.
having a tantrum, what do I do? Or they've heard about gentle parenting and they Google gentle parenting, but don't know where to start or what it is even. And
Mhm.
so parents who are already sort of curious and hungry and looking for support is
Mhm.
definitely our first ring. And then our goal is, how do we, through both acquisition of customers as well as general branding, make parenting support not an anomaly. I would,
Mhm.
in the same way, like, I think we're creating a generational shift, in the same way that I think a lot of people would have looked at the mental health space a while ago, right? Like,
Mhm.
you should treat your mental wellness you don't seek help just if you're in the middle of a crisis, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of a general practice that you should be supporting your mental well-being in the same way you
Mhm.
should support your physical well-being. And we want to create the standard that parental support
Mhm.
is a standard when you come into parenthood, that you're, whether it's Cooper or someone else, that you're getting
Mhm.
that expert support that you need.
Totally. I guess, like, one of the, like, things that because since, like, I just had a kid, I feel like a lot of the, questions I would just straight up ask my doctor, and I wonder, like, how do you kind of, like, see that, like, if people have a certain type of problem, they just ask the doctor. And then in our hospital, we also have, like, a little, like, a mom group. So I guess it's a part of it's kind of like the blind leading the blind. It's like basically everybody have no clue what's going on. But we have, like, 1 or 2 nurses, they just, like, check in with us or something. So, I wonder, like, what's the existing solution, and then how is it, like, majorly differentiated, like, compared to, like, people may using, like, a free group right now. And what the other part is, like, I guess, like, when you're building a community, there's, like, the chicken and egg problem, which is like, do you get the um when you get the expert, like, how do you kind of, like, manage the community? And then, like, what's the incentive for the expert? Is this, like, expert hired for, like, is this, like, a full-time person on the staff, team? Or, like, how I guess, like, also, like, how do you kind of, like, do you get community manager first, or do you build the community first? And what is how do you kind of, like, shape the culture of the community? What do people expect? All that, like, since the community is the product. So I wonder, how do you kind of think of these things?
Yeah, great questions. So I'll break that apart. First, your pediatrician. Your pediatrician is
Mhm.
obviously a great first resource, particularly when your child is. Remind me, Grace, how old is your daughter?
He is, 8-month old. Yeah,
8
it's a
months old, okay.
yeah.
So you're still in that, like, phase where your doctor visits are often frequent, right? Like, it's
Mhm,
initially, like, almost
mhm,
weekly, then it's monthly, then it's every
mhm,
6 months, as your kids age, you're going once a year to the doctor. So your touch point with the doctor, again, falls off, as
mhm,
your children age, firstly. Secondly, your doctor's amazing for all the medical questions that you may have. And at the beginning, a lot of it is feeding or sleep or a rash or this, that, and the other.
mhm,
But developmentally, your doctor, in the same way that I wouldn't go to my GP and talked about, like, things that I'm struggling with on that weren't medical, like, your doctor is not necessarily suited, and some maybe, most are not, don't have the child behavioral element in their background, like, they're very medical. And what we do at Cooper is around behavior and child development. So it's around, how do you ensure your child is going to thrive, not just survive, right? Your doctor's a
mhm,
little bit more on the survival mode, and we are on the thrive
mhm.
mode, right? So we're filling in so many gaps that your doctor might not even be asking you or bringing up. I like to
Mhm,
say that at Cooper, we answer questions you didn't even know you had, right? So you
mhm,
might not be focused on that as a parent, and yet here we are to help help you understand, what are the things that you should be focused on, what are the things that you should be paying attention to, what are the things that you should be scaffolding your child on sooner rather than later. One example I like to use in my own personal experience, which I was in a Cooper group, is when my child was younger and, a toddler, you're so focused on, let's get them tired out for their nap, right?
mhm,
And there's so much focus on the gross motor, right? Like, are they crawling? Are they crawling? Are they going to walk? Oh my God, they're going to take their first steps, which is, like,
mhm,
so exciting. But so much so, and it's such a bigger milestone and a bigger visual milestone in parents'
mhm,
minds, that they're not focused on the fine motor for a long time. And then what can end up happening is, all of a sudden your kid goes into kindergarten and they come home and they say, I hate school. I hate writing. I'm bad at it. And here you are as a parent being like, oh my God, what's going on? Do they have issues? Like, do I need to get them, like, extra support? And reality is, if you had practiced more fine motor, which I was made aware of because of Cooper, like, yes, it's great for them to run around. And when they come and they take a break, like, put some Play-Doh in front of them, give them some scissors, like, obviously child safe scissors. Give them
mhm.
some, like, practice beating, even as an, like, baby, when they're starting to eat, give them some Cheerios instead of puffs. You know why? Because Cheerios, they have to use their pincher muscles. Puffs,
Mhm.
it's sticky. It can stick to their hand. They can just
Mhm.
grab it like this, right? That's not how you hold a pencil. You hold a pen, your pincher muscles need to sort of improve. So it's the same way as sort of saying, like, if you went from never riding a bike to going the next day and trying to ride 100 miles, you'd also come home and say how much you hate bike riding, right? Like every
Mhm.
skill needs to be practiced and built up. And so at Cooper, we're helping parents develop these skills for their child, whether it's the fine motor skills that they might not have thought about
Mhm.
until it was time for their child to learn how to write, and yet there's so much to
Mhm.
do, or whether it's similarly on the behavioral issues where your 10-year-old, you go into a store and they say, I want that toy. And you say, no, we're buying a birthday present for someone else. And they have a fit. And again, we haven't built up their tolerance for disappointment or their tolerance for patience and all of these skills that are also behavioral and emotional skills that you didn't know that you were supposed to be practicing early on.
Mhm.
And so I would say that's where the big difference between like your pediatrician and Cooper will come in. As far as sort of like the free services and groups out there, of course, it's hard to have someone pay for something when there's a free service. Again,
Mhm.
I would say the major difference with us is one, like, first of all, I live in Manhattan. I was not offered a free parenting group from Mount Sinai Hospital.
Mhm.
I was offered barely 24 hours in the hospital and then swiftly asked to leave.
Mhm.
So next, if I have another, if number 4 ever enters my purview, I'm coming to your hospital to
Oh
have
my
that.
god, please. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think you're really lucky to have that support. Most people do not
Mhm.
have that as a free support in their area. And also, again, we are there all the way through. So I don't know how long that support is offered, but generally we see it's 6 months if you're lucky, a year if
Mhm.
you're super lucky. And then what do you do? Like, just because your baby is a year old, that support is still needed as they grow. It's not, there's more opportunities, there's more questions, the challenges change. My now 6.5-year-old, I would say, is more challenging than she was
Mhm.
as a baby, um, just because in some ways, like, the stakes are higher and there's less of a rule book. And how do I help scaffold her with like friendship development? And when she comes home and says someone
Mhm.
was mean to her, like, my instinct is to like just protect her rather than help her work through those emotions or try and understand, like, was she actually being mean, or was it a perspective? Or, what are things that you could have done that changed that scenario, and how to sort of scaffold that. Like, that's so much more complicated than a crying baby that needs to be
Mhm.
changed or fed or put to sleep. And of course, at the time when she was a baby, I thought, like, I was never going to get my life back, and this is impossible, and
Mhm.
this is so hard. And again, like, hindsight is a gift in so many ways, but that is where we really are different. And we keep using the word community here, but I would
Mhm.
like to really harness in that our product is expertise. Our product isn't just community. There's lots of places to get community, and you should have multiple communities, and we would never discourage that. And we are a community, but with the expertise is what really, really differentiates our product. That's what's making sure, like, when you ask like our competitors and what else was around, like, honestly, we're fighting against Facebook groups. Like, Facebook groups in
Mhm.
some ways are like the worst thing that could have ever happened to parents, right? You put in a question there and you get 1,000 responses on like why your question is wrong. And from people who
Mhm.
are trying to help, but don't have the authority to be able to be answering those questions
Mhm.
for you. And it's again, like, a lot of opinion and noise that you don't need to hear, and a lot of judgment. And I think the expert, both driven and moderated community that we have at Cooper really stops a lot of that from happening, which can be really damaging to parents. Like, 1 in 5 moms are dealing with postpartum depression or anxiety, and like, that shouldn't be the case. They should have more support. That is not the outcome for parents, and that is really a result in their, again, that cliff once you have your baby, that you're no longer supported as a parent. All the attention goes onto your baby, and there's just so many places where you're faced with judgment and opinion dressed as fact. Like, it's almost no wonder parents go through that.
I wonder, let's say, like, because of my experience is like only primarily limited to like before I give birth, I was like doing a ton of research on how to parent or how to like survive this whole thing. So I wonder, like, when I was watching a lot of the top, like, I want to say clinician or like some nurses or like some kind of influencer in this space, in the momming space, they all have their own group to a degree. And I wonder, how do you see like Cooper kind of differentiated from, let's say, if I'm being in a group of this, famous influencer, they may be like a pediatrician before they were like a full-time content creator. So I wonder, how do you kind of like see the competition there? And I guess when you're expanding the community at a scale, what were some challenges that you are facing and how you're like kind of like tackling these things?
Yeah, so I'll answer your last
Mhm,
question first. Um, I think again, like we're creating a new category. So I think the growing is the difficulty in terms of
mhm,
making people aware around what this service is. And there's a lot of confusion around like,
mhm,
what do I, how do I, like, I love to use like Headspace as an example. Like at first it
mhm,
was like, why do I need to meditate? What is meditation? And it became such common practice of sort of guiding
mhm,
someone through. Again, I think what's so unique about Cooper, and that, so a lot of what we're doing to combat that is the education around like what is unique about us. And I think there's tons of really, for every great advice and actual expert out there, there might be 10 people
mhm,
that are calling themselves experts and may not have the actual credentials. And I think that's
mhm,
part of the scary part around like, how do you navigate this?
mhm,
I think but for the experts that are there, like we love partnering with experts. We love, when people are asking us around like, what is a great step by step on feeding? Like we often will say, like, go to Starting Solids. Like it's amazing. Like she's built out such a robust step by step guide. Like we might not be as precise in that one area. Our approach is really holistically. So often people will say, like, I need help with sleep. And you're like, okay, so,
mhm,
and when you unpack that,
mhm,
it's often not just sleep. It's generally
mhm,
like what is leading to that lack of sleep. And it's oftentimes that we're getting that from parents with kids, again, who are not babies, who are older. And there's so
mhm,
many reasons that can cause a disruption in sleep, whether it's developmental because their imagination has all of a sudden skyrocketed, whether
mhm,
it's limit setting. And all of a sudden your child is sort of creating, stretching their authority, if you will, and trying to build autonomy for themselves. And the one thing they can control is not going to sleep, right? You can't force a child to go to sleep. Um, and so it's dealing with, when we look at it, we don't look at that sort of like one area. And even with food, like I have a picky eater, like we're not looking at that one area necessarily around like how are they sleeping or how are they eating. We're really looking holistically around like all the things leading up to that. Is it a behavioral? Is it you're now all of a sudden becoming like opening up a restaurant in your kitchen? And anytime your child says they don't want anything, you're cooking 9 other things. And now they've gotten used
mhm,
to this pattern. And so I think that's where we really differentiate, is dealing with it holistically and for the long term. Most platforms look at a slice, and here you can stay with us for 18 plus years.
mhm,
So you never have to sort of turn anywhere again. And sort of the last thing is like we're happy to see more people entering this space. Like I'm definitely a big believer in a rising tides lifts all boats. Like I don't think it's possible for any one company to serve everyone. And everyone's going to have their own sort of particular, like you like chocolate, I like vanilla. Like, why
mhm,
is that? Like, I don't know. It's a personal preference. And so I think like there will be preferences with people who sort of like the tone or the personality of one expert versus another. And again, our platform is not based on one individual. We have lots of experts working with us. We have both
mhm,
full-time experts who are building our curriculum and our content and our training, other um, expert facilitators, and then we have
mhm,
part-time people who are working with us just running their groups. And so we can really help you find the sort of fit and personality that works with you best, as opposed to, if you don't like this one person, like, sorry.
mm. Totally. Okay, so some of our listeners are like, I would say many of our listeners are founders themselves, like a lot of them working in tech. Let's say if they want to create like community-based product, how would you like basically advise them to start something like this? Because I think what you have done is like very incredible in terms of, because I feel like it's a really big community. You have to parents are everywhere. And I feel like you have to narrow down on like where to start as your first like cohort of people. And how do you kind of like convince like, the top educators in the space to be on the platform, as well as convincing people to join the platform, as well as like pay for the platform, and kind of like making them say, like, how do you kind of think about these like three big bracket of things that you have to do? And since like many of the listeners, let's say if they want to create a developer platform or like a developer community, or like they want to create like a venture capital community, what do you suggest as like, let's say, three things that people kind of figure out before they move forward with creating a product like this?
Yeah. So sorry, you had asked something similar, and I didn't answer it in terms of what, like chicken or egg, right? Community
Yeah.
versus expert. I think it sort of depends. Again, that's where we try and differentiate. It depends on your what you have to really be really clear about what is the product you're offering. Are you offering
Mhm.
a peer community when you're learning where you're learning from one another, or are you offering an expert, masterclass type of situation? We're more in the latter. So we are expert driven. And so I would say, like, first you have to focus on that. And therefore, like, is it the expertise? Like, what are people coming for? What is the main reason? Is it to learn from their peers? Then you got to build up that community of peers first. And you got to get peers that
Mhm.
have a name that other people trust. And how do you get the first ones on? Like, that is your number one job as a entrepreneur. Like, you're a salesperson through and through,
Mhm.
whether you're selling
Mhm.
an employee, whether you're selling an investor, whether you're selling a customer, whether you're selling like your partner, that it makes sense for you to quit your
Mhm.
job and work on this full time, whether you're selling it to yourself. So like, you need to hone on your sales skills first and foremost in order to be successful, and like be shameless at it. Like, it is can be sometimes the most painful part of the job, and yet like so needed. So for us, we really were leaning into the expertise aspect of our business. Like, we felt like there's so much information locked up in ivory towers of academia that we saw this as a problem. And we saw the other hand of this, of so many parents needing support, and how do we bridge that gap? And so I first went out on the expertise side. There was a model of an expert group in the city that I had done, and which was called Ceilings Group. Bronwyn Charlton and Eliza Pressman had launched that, and it was very in person. We went to each other's apartments, and it was amazing. But as sort of the world went virtual and scaled, she's the first person I approached, and she really helped us in order to like think about what could this look bigger, and she still advises us today. And then it was sort of like, okay, now who can actually help build the curriculum side? So we spent over a year building on the curriculum before we sort of opened up the floodgates, if you will, on the community, to make sure that when they came, that we could deliver upon the product that we promised to them, right?
Mhm.
So when you join, depending on where your child is, if you're joining with a 5-year-old child, you need to have content that helps the parent of a 5-year-old in the same way that you need to have content for the newborn. So we actually started with 0 to 5 initially, of parents for 0 to 5, and then we built up from 5 to 10. Now we have up to 14, and then we also launched our groups for parents of children with ADHD, and built that first, and built that and just launched that. And so I think the need was obvious to our experts. The how was, I think, a little bit harder. So selling them, it took a lot of dancing. Our, VP of community and content, who runs almost all of our groups right now, it took over a year to convince her to join.
Mhm.
And it was just a constant dating game and building the relationship and getting her comfortable with who we are as a team, on the concept, on what are the steps, painting the picture, making it really clear to her how it could work, because ultimately, she's taking a risk on us, on herself, on the business.
Mhm.
All startups are such a risk. And also partly helping sell to her that like she could do this, right? Like was for her
Mhm.
first time joining a startup as early as we were pre-launch, and was she ready for what that entailed going forward? So I would say like, yeah, I don't know if that's sort of like how we did it on the expertise side, but like really play out what does this future look like, and be able to paint that picture to sort of everyone in your surrounding,
Mhm.
and start by trying to convince your closest circle, and then out and continue practicing on your pitch. And that's like number one through three of how to get this
Mhm.
off the ground, because if you can't
Mhm.
sell your partner, your friend, how are you going to sell your third, fourth tier of customer that you have zero personal connection to,
Mhm.
when you have sort of 30 seconds, if that, on an
Mhm.
ad, or them quickly scrolling through your website, that this is something that they should pay for?
Totally. I guess like when you first started, was it like a free group and then like slowly switching to paid, or and then also like let's say like would you charge like at a higher end at the beginning and then like maybe roll out like cheaper tiers or like cheaper like version of the services, or like would you start with like a freemium kind of vibe thing, so to attract as many people as possible? Do you feel like in the end, the conversion are like the people who start out with like non-paid version, or would you say the other way around? Like people have to start paying something and then they maybe you upsell or downsell the product.
Yeah, I think it's, user testing can be looked at in a like that's essentially what you're sort of saying. If like a free
Mhm.
version is user testing, and I do think it's good to sort of like work some kinks out. But at the end of the day, like you only get so far with like surveying or doing
Mhm.
user research. Like the true testament is if someone's going to pull out their credit card and enter it and
Mhm.
actually pay
Mhm.
for it, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of things that I probably would do if it was free, but might
Mhm.
not do if I had to pay for it.
Mhm.
Um, and you can't build a business off of everything being for free. So my advice would be more so to like see how many people you can get paying for it too, because also if they're paying, they're going to be less forgiving of sort of hiccups, right?
Mhm.
So they're going to cancel real fast too. And
Mhm.
I wouldn't do that before you're necessarily ready. So maybe you start with a group that you trust that are free in order to give you all the feedback, but then you really have to dig for that feedback. You have to then do calls with them, like, don't take the like, yeah, it's great at face value. Like, be like, okay, but what could be better? And what's the most annoying part about our service? And
Mhm.
really understand. Um, because your patience and tolerance for things that are free are a lot
Mhm.
higher than for when you're paying. And it could be giving you false positive signals that you're building a business off of, a service that ultimately people wouldn't invest in. So I would go free. I would go paid from the start, as
Mhm.
soon as you're ready. And I think like you can do a lot of testing on that price point. Everyone always says it's easier to go down market than up market. We decided that we wanted not to create a overly gated community where we were building a product for the 1%. Again, all parents need and deserve the support. And so we're trying to make it
Mhm.
as accessible as we can. And so we didn't go with a multi-$1,000 a year membership model that you'll find elsewhere in sort of other tangential spaces. We really tried to we surveyed looked at the landscape of what people are paying for kids classes or gym memberships and sort of other things that people are willing to invest in, and sort of triangulated our pricing around that so that it was meaningful to people, but was still accessible.
Mm. I wonder, would you say like so last week we had an marketing expert, he kind of like mentioned about like, maybe you start with um ads first, like so basically like testing out like basically having a
Like
mock page.
vapor testing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So basically have a mock page and then you just run ads and then see how many people actually sign up um before you actually build the product. Have you guys done something similar?
Um, yeah, we didn't do that approach. Like that approach
Mhm.
is really interesting to see sort of from a CAC perspective too. Um, I think for us, we just felt like that it wasn't going to give the true picture and story, and that we are able to, we have a really, again, hopefully a really long LTV with families. And so CAC wasn't our biggest concern at the beginning because we're not a one and done product, right?
Mhm.
If you're selling a crib, just as an example, right? You have such a finite amount of time to grab a customer, and they're likely not buying anything again from you unless they have multiple children within a short time period. Like,
Mhm.
we have potentially 18 years of lifetime value with someone. And so
Mhm.
we knew that for us, the more important factor would be on the retention side, around whether we could
Mhm.
really deliver on a product that kept people sticky. And so that, and again, even today, we're not really running a bunch of ads. Like, we
Mhm.
don't run ads on Meta. We're mostly word of mouth with some paid search, and a lot of partnerships with other like-minded parenting brands to get the word out. So we didn't go that route because I also felt like there's lots of ways to build businesses. And if you're building them just from paid acquisition, that's also sort of worrying for me too, particularly with all the changes. I saw at Ollie overnight, our CAC go from predictable to completely unpredictable when iOS made all the privacy changes. And so I didn't want to be beholden on one source of acquisition in a way that many companies are. And so we were like, how can we attract customers both through ambassadors, potential influencers, brand partnerships, and organically through social and other partnerships. And then we can enhance that with paid, but not rely exclusively on paid.
Mm. How, as a CEO, how do you kind of like split your time between like building brand partnerships to like, doing the word of mouth, or like convincing like influencer to, or like ambassadors to like ever like educate the crowd? I wonder like how do you kind of spend your time from product development to community management
Yeah, that's a
and
great question.
traditional waste funding?
Yeah, I think like my job as CEO is constantly rewriting my job, to sort of see where the biggest needs are and blockades, and where my sort of team members need the most help. At the beginning, I was very, very, very focused on product as we were building it out. And as that sort of becomes stable, I feel like it's a little bit of like a whack-a-mole, honestly, as a CEO, right? Like, if we feel like one area is struggling, then I'll sort of dive in there to help build it back up or put the pieces
Mhm.
together. And then we'll shift over based on what the current needs and priorities of the business. So, like, first and
Mhm.
foremost, it's sort of setting your priorities on what you need to accomplish in any quarter, any week. And then what resources do we have to accomplish that? And where am I most effective to help push to ensure that that goal happens?
When
So
you're
it's ever
pitching.
evolving. Like, there's not I think like it's, if a CEO looks at their role as like sort of one faceted, they could get into trouble by not being willing to jump into different areas.
For sure. I wonder when you're thinking about like fundraising for your company, like I guess like how do you figure out the right investor for you? And because maybe I live in Silicon Valley, so I feel like in Silicon Valley, unless you're pitching some sort of like software aspect of things, like it's really hard to like get meaningful amount of funding. And like I wonder, yeah, like what's your like fundraising process look like?
Yeah. Um, so at Ollie, we raised a lot of money
Mhm.
earlier on because we were a very capital intensive business. We were building our own manufacturing, we had our own
Mhm.
supply chain, we built our distribution centers. This time around, we don't have as much CapEx.
Mhm.
And so it was very different kinds of investors, as well as different sort of type of round that we did.
Mhm.
We've only raised a pre-seed thus far. We've enabled it to last a really long time by sort of being much more prudent with our capital expenditures, and really finding like-minded partners who believe in the mission of what we're
Mhm.
doing, and investors that are a little bit more patient than traditional venture capital might be, given the nature of that. Like, I think building a brand and building the expert driven community does take more time than sort of selling a one-off product that sort of
Mhm.
you can keep going on. And so feeling like, making sure that we painted that realistic picture to potential investors, And the ones that got it were the ones that felt like they were the right ones for us versus sort of falsely painting a picture around, I think hockey stick growth that would have required or would require throwing a ton of money at marketing to not know what the outcome would be yet.
Mhm,
And so I think we're building up to that, but was important for us to really find more patient capital than traditional venture for, not just what kind of business
mhm,
we think that this is going to be, but also what kind of business like me and my team wanted to build this time around, and sort of build it more slowly over time with a sort of vantage point to get to profitability much sooner than otherwise would too. And I think that there's lots of different ways to build a business. And I think there's sort of a story around like you're either bootstrapped or you're like majorly venture funded. And I think there's a lot of in between and gray area that people can
mhm,
explore with different kinds of capital. We had a lot of angel investors that are operators themselves that saw this
mhm,
as a really important, needed business that, given the time and sort of breathing room to grow, could have the potential for a great outcome. That doesn't mean that we need to be, 100 million in 5 years, and
mhm,
then sell for a billion. And like the math has to math in order for that
mhm,
to work, and sort of paint different pictures around like we can still have a really great exit where everyone's making their required 3 4 5x investment over
mhm.
a certain amount of period of time with various outcomes, and sort of painted different scenarios for that.
Totally. I wonder when you're thinking about, the outcome, um, would you say, like, IPO is what you're going after? Or, like, would you say, like, a exit from, like, selling it or, like, just being a super profitable business? And I wonder, like, what do you think is, like, the best outcome for Cooper? And, like, how do you kind of design your, growth journey around that exit, a plan?
Yeah. IPO is not like I personally don't want to run a publicly traded company, so that is not where we're specifically headed. I think that ultimately, like again, our mission is to serve as many parents as possible. And so I think that for us, where we're sort of gearing towards is how do we build a really sustainable product that then a larger company that has massive distribution sees the value of. So whether that's, a diaper brand that's getting all the parents at day one, or a formula brand, or whether it's
Mhm,
a media company that realizes that it needs to sort of change their monetization strategy and needs a
mhm,
service instead of just editorial, or even something in the healthcare industry realizing that, hey, this is like investing in wellness is super important because it reduces costs later on, and it's an imperative that we need to take as a country, essentially.
mhm,
I think there's a lot of really exciting and potential exit opportunities for Cooper. And so I never want to have to build a business that's sort of pigeonholed into one. And then if that one fails, that we don't have alternative paths. And so from a very early stage, I'm always talking with different strategics and potentials to understand what's interesting and valuable to them. And that sort of again like sits in the back of my head and marinates.
mhm.
And as we're making different decisions along the way, it sort of allows me to think about those and have those paths in mind.
Mm. I want to ask one real question at the end. Like, I don't know if you have more time.
Sure.
Okay, so I wonder, like, because of I feel like you said, like, basically being a CEO is like all over the place. You have to like just put out the fire, like that's like firing. So I wonder who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to like being like the founder of a company, and how do you mentioned like you would talk to a lot of valuable like strategic partners to learn more about like what they care about. I guess like who would you kind of like consult at the beginning to get the process started? And yeah, like how do you kind of like arrange your time on or a content diet to like keep evolving?
Yeah, I'm like very much like an out loud and extroverted thinker. So I will talk to as many people that will listen to me and give me back advice. And so first, like now that we have customers, a lot of it is talking to customers, understanding what they like about our platform, what we could do better about it, and allowing that to sort of be a driving force in our future product development. I think like being in touch with your customers is really, really, really important.
Mhm.
And then it's also like a lot of people in seats like mine, I think my best advocates and advice in the current stages are other mom entrepreneurs, other
Mhm.
founders who are also juggling the extra burden of having young kids at home and trying to quote unquote do it all, even though we all know it's impossible to actually do it all at all times. But like what strategies they use, and what they've learned. And it's incredible, like the community and how we've been able to sort of support each other and work together and partner and give each other sort of hacks and advice and different services and different introductions. And so recently, that's really who I've been leaning on. And there's been amazing sort of Slack groups of other mom entrepreneurs. That, as well as other companies. Famtech has been really amazing, which is a nonprofit organization helping to sort of bring all of these businesses that are building for families together as well. And then also my investors have been super supportive. Like, again, I went into it saying like, I'm always going to be transparent. I'm not going to paint the rosy picture for you to get to the next round. Like, I'm going to tell you all the deep and dirty
Mhm.
happenings in the business, because like if you're going to be supportive, I need you to know all the things to be supportive. And so when I call them, it's not a surprise or anything, and it's really like working through tactics rather than treating them as just someone to report out to. It's utilizing them as like working sessions with every conversation. And so I'm regularly like unscheduled meetings will pick up the phone and just call
Mhm.
one of my investors and just have a call with them around like, okay, this just happened, what do you think? So I think that's
Mhm.
also really nice and different this time around.
Amazing. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Gabby, for like
Thank you
sharing
for
with us
having me.
everything about parenting to founding a community-based company. It's an amazing session. Where can people find you?
So you can find us at yourcooper.com, or your_Cooper on social. And I'm just Gabby Slome across all social channels.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gabby, for coming on the
Thank
show today.
you.
Let
Bye.
me